the Kharkiv region, air defense troops from the 57th Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade, named after Kostya Gordienko, destroyed several large enemy reconnaissance drones in the Vovchansk direction. These are exactly the drones the invaders use to locate and target strikes on defense forces positions.
We identify specific locations, strike them, and clear them out. So it's a mutual pretty tough job here. They try to break through, and we carry out clearing operations. And accordingly, these are strikes on broader logistical routes and reserves. This is one of the main systematic tasks right now. It's a very effective model because it wipes out a large number of enemy forces at once, spreads panic, and doesn't let them form up into combat positions.
Meanwhile, in Kupiansk, Kharkiv region, fewer than 50 Russian soldiers remain, who are surrounded, according to the Joint Forces grouping. We're talking about an area just north of the city center, near the hospital. And in the Konstantinovka direction, Russian invaders tried to break through the Ukrainian defenses near the settlements of Klobanbiyka and Sofievka. On the Pokrovsk section of the front, Russian occupiers attempted assaults near Radinske, Molodetske, and toward Filia. And near Huliaipole, Ukrainian defenders repelled attacks by the aggressor in the areas of Solodkov and Novy Zaporizhia. Zelina and Verkhnya Tursa came under enemy airstrikes.
Today, we need to highlight two strategic directions. These are indeed the Pokrovsk and Huliaipole directions. That's exactly where the enemy is focusing its main efforts. The enemy is now trying to push us back in both Pokrovsk and Myrnograd from all sides. On one hand, these are attacks, frontline assaults, infiltrations, through various systems in the city. It's house to house, basement to basement, with 1, 2, or 3 people at a time. On the other hand, of course, there are attacks from the flanks. They're specifically trying to focus their efforts from different directions on the northern part of Pokrovsk. And here we're seeing not only more active group attacks, but at times even larger groups. There were even up to about 120 people whom we eliminated. 3 platoons 3 days ago.
The Russians continue to involve the North Korean army contingent in the war against Ukraine. According to the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, as of January this year, the DPRK military group is located in the Kursk region, from where they launch attacks on Ukrainian border communities. Under Russian command, they're firing from tube artillery and multiple launch rocket systems. They're also carrying out aerial reconnaissance missions.
Since the North Korean contingent began participating in Russia's war against Ukraine, about 3,000 trained and experienced soldiers have already returned to North Korea. Most of them become military instructors to pass on the skills of 21st century warfare to the entire North Korean army. This is according to a statement from the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine on the agency's website.
The total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale war against Ukraine have already exceeded 1,243,000 people. Just in the past day, the defense forces have eliminated another 780 Russian occupiers. In addition, the following were destroyed: 4 tanks, 7 armored vehicles, 60 artillery systems, a multiple launch rocket system, air defense assets, as well as more than 200 enemy vehicles and special equipment.
Yuri Fedorenko, commander of the 429th Separate Brigade of Unmanned Systems, Akilia from the command of the Unmanned Systems Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, is joining our broadcast. Yuri, we welcome you, glad to see you, and glory to Ukraine.
Glad to be here. Glory to the heroes.
Yuri, well, we understand that one of the hottest spots remains, of course, the Pokrovsky direction. How do you see the situation around this settlement? But we understand that it's not just about Pokrovsk. We realize that Myrnograd is also under constant pressure from the occupying forces. Accordingly, we understand what objectives the Russian occupying army is trying to achieve. But overall, your analysis, your view of what we are witnessing right now?
The enemy is setting objectives for itself. The main one is the complete destruction of Ukrainian statehood, the destruction of the Ukrainian people. This statehood exists, and there's a step-by-step plan for occupation. If we talk about Donetsk region, this is one of the enemy's key priorities. That's why, in this direction, the enemy always has enough resources, both in terms of drones and the ability to support their actions. Aviation, light armored and armored vehicles, logistics, everything needed, as they say, to carry out their missions. When we look at the situation regarding advancing in the Donetsk region, the enemy has absolutely every single resource they request from their higher command. That's the unfortunate and objective reality of the situation. Over the past year, the enemy has been storming positions using small group tactics, 2 or 3 servicemen at a time. Now, very often, we see groups of 10 to 15 servicemen advancing on a specific section of the front line. Speaking of the agglomeration, which includes Radenske and Mirny Pokrov, right now it's very important for the enemy to reach the settlement of Grishine. And as a result, that's the kind of tactic they're using. Larger groups compared to the pairs and trios from before. Now the enemy is also trying to use this approach. What should we pay attention to? In the last 10 days, the enemy has made no advances. There's been no tactical success for them on the front lines in these areas. It's also worth mentioning that the enemy is waiting for the right moment, depending on the weather conditions. How does this work? Right now, the weather is very good. It's freezing, below zero, and clear skies. In other words, with night cameras, we see just as clearly as we do during the day. And during the day, we see just as well as at night. So you can take advantage of that. Put simply, you can take a long-range daytime drone and launch it at night. This gives you the ability to conduct reconnaissance. Visibility is that good right now. As a result, the enemy, they don't carry out assault operations as actively as they do in bad weather conditions. What do I mean by that? A week ago, there was a situation where first it was freezing and clear, then the frost disappeared, it warmed up, the temperature went above zero, and fog rolled in. And under the cover of fog, the enemy started moving up their rear units. The enemy brings up their equipment, resupplies the fire positions. And of course, there were attempts to carry out assault operations with a certain number of troops, which, unfortunately, the enemy still has enough of in this direction. They still have plenty left, and as a result, the enemy tried to achieve some tactical gains, but that didn't happen. The goal they're pursuing is that they really need to reach Barvinkovo. Using World War II maps, the enemy understands that by reaching Barvinkov, they could achieve a result by blocking the logistics route from the Dnipro to Kramatorsk-Sloviansk. Also, the Izium-Kramatorsk-Sloviansk highway is currently under the control of enemy forces as well. And right now, our engineers are doing a truly remarkable and extensive job, working hard to secure the area with safety corridors and restoring the road surface. This damage occurred right after the enemy forces struck the area with their drones. That is exactly why the town of Barvinkov has become the primary direction the enemy is so desperate to reach before the end of the winter season, or by the very beginning of the spring months. And let's put it this way, to secure their success, they want to guarantee the blockade of logistics by the middle of summer 2026. But whether the enemy will be able to accomplish this task, personally, I don't believe so. And what the defense forces are doing now on the front line, including in the Pokrovsk direction, is a great feat by the Ukrainian soldier. And this is an unprecedented display of resilience from a military art perspective. Let me explain why. Sometimes, for every one of our soldiers, there are 11 or 12 enemy soldiers at a given moment. And yet, the defense forces don't even allow them to achieve tactical results. To accomplish what the enemy wants, but that's just looking at the last 10 days we can analyze. Isn't that incredible resilience? This is extraordinary resilience achieved through the tremendous efforts of the Ukrainian people and the heroism of the Ukrainian soldier. This is something we need to understand. And in order for us to endure, and we do have that possibility, there is a chance to make Russia be forced to sign a peace agreement. For that, we need to have a unified position, both within our own country, that is, we must maintain unity, and in our work with our partners. Of course, we are in great need of additional assistance, including air defense systems.
Yuri, let's talk about how the occupiers' tactics are changing and whether we can draw any conclusions by looking at how they've been behaving lately. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, stated that for its attempt to seize the entire Donetsk region, Moscow will have to pay an extremely high price. In his opinion, this would take at least 2 years and about 800,000 casualties among Russian military personnel. And even then, the pace of their advance would be extremely slow, due to the lack of significant military successes by the Russian Federation's army since the start of the full-scale invasion. The head of state noted that even maintaining the current front line would be a serious concession for Ukraine, since a frozen conflict scenario would benefit Russia. Additional time and resources to prepare for a new escalation. Let's listen to the quote and then come back.
Russia is striving for Ukraine to abandon the Donbass. However, the Russian army pays a significant price for every meter of this territory. Human losses are not taken into account. To capture eastern Ukraine, Russia would have to lose about another 800,000 of its soldiers. Such a resource is not infinite. A frozen conflict means a gain of time for Russia. Any demilitarized zone can only exist if it's under full Ukrainian control. Russia is trying to increase pressure and suffering on the civilian population to force Ukraine to accept its terms. In fact, this is an ultimatum. The President of the United States has economic, sanctions, and military levers at his disposal. It is precisely these that can influence the Kremlin's position. At the same time, any compromises regarding Ukraine's sovereignty are unacceptable. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, in an interview with France 2 television channel.
We see how the front is turning into an element of political pressure during negotiations. We see what's happening with the situation in Kubi, where supposedly, according to the Kremlin, Russian tricolors are being hung up, but the Ukrainian side denies all of this with video evidence and shows the truth. How do you see the dynamics of the occupiers' changing behavior? And what about these losses they're suffering? How insignificant are they? And is it noticeable that there are more foreign mercenaries fighting for Putin? How has this changed? And what about the qualitative composition of the Russian Federation's army?
It's hard to say. You'd have to ask commanders at the operational level because they understand the entire line of combat contact. In the areas where we operate, there's a certain number of mercenaries. This indicates that the enemy is systematically working to coerce and bribe citizens of other countries to conduct military operations against Ukraine. As much as obvious, but to say that this proportion is very large, from what we see, no, it isn't. There are mercenaries. Mostly, these are people from the Russian Federation who signed contracts for so-called sign-on bonuses. In other words, they basically sold themselves for money to fight against Ukraine. And unfortunately, there is a certain number of them. There are Ukrainians who, due to the specific nature of their background and citizenship, those individuals who have stayed behind in the occupied territories over previous years, some before they were even of age, and others who are already adults, now find that the Russian Federation is forcibly conscripting them into military service. By the way, this is unfortunately a very clear and powerful example in terms of showing the true reality of the situation face of the Russian Federation. If anyone thinks those who have now switched to draft dodger mode and don't want to serve in the armed forces of Ukraine, for whatever reasons, but there are those who are liable for military service. We must remember that in any territory where the Russian Federation arrives, there are no investigations afterward, no recruitment programs, or any other such issues. Everyone is forcibly put under arms, and Ukrainians are thrown into war against their own state, used as expendable material with the least support, sent to the most difficult fronts. And that's how it has always been throughout the history of the Russian Federation, of Russia as a whole. It's happening now, it will continue to happen in the future. That's why it's so incredibly important to protect and defend your land with your own army, and not the way it is right now for those guys who, for a variety of different reasons, have found themselves staying in the temporarily occupied territories. We should also say that for now, Russia, the military currently maintains a sufficient supply of resources to be able to effectively mobilize and deploy fresh reinforcements to the front lines. But there are significant constraints regarding their overall training capacity within the borders of the Russian Federation itself. Right now, they can process from 30,000 to 37,000 servicemen per month, turning civilians into soldiers. In other words, put them into formation. They send them to the front as reinforcements for the Federation and to participate in combat operations, specifically in terms of active offensive actions. It is from this specific figure that the defense forces need to organize their strategic operations. This is achieved through funding and the development of specialized units, through a dedicated and consistent long-term commitment. Increasing the level of funding for the armed forces themselves so that we can eliminate 50,000 on the line of combat zones. In the future, then we will be able to say that the enemy will lose the ability to conduct active offensive operations. There will be no one left to attack with. And where the enemy loses these capabilities, we gain an additional tool to achieve the necessary political and diplomatic leverage over the enemy.